Around 1177 BC, on a wall in Egypt, a king named Ramses III ordered his masons to carve a battle, not a small skirmish, a naval battle for the survival of his kingdom against people who, in his own words, came together in their isles. He won. He carved the victory in stone. And he never wrote down who exactly his enemy was. Within 20 years, more than 50 cities across the eastern Mediterranean burned to the ground. The kingdoms of Mycenae, the Hittite Empire, the trade port of Ugarit, the Cypriot palaces, all gone. Writing systems collapsed. Trade routes vanished. Some regions would not see literacy again for 400 years. Egypt survived. Barely. This was the Late Bronze Age collapse, the most catastrophic civilizational failure in recorded history before the fall of Rome. And at the center of it sit those people Ramses fought, the Sea Peoples. Today, we still do not know with certainty who they were, where they came from, or whether they caused the collapse, or were swept up in it. To understand them, we have to understand the world they helped end. By 1250 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was a single, connected economy. Mycenaean Greeks traded olive oil for Egyptian linen. Cypriot copper became Hittite bronze. A merchant in Ugarit could write a letter in cuneiform on a clay tablet, send it by ship to Crete, and expect a reply within a season. The palaces ran on this trade. They produced little for themselves, redistributing instead. When the trade stopped, the palaces had nothing to redistribute. The first cracks showed in the 1220s BC. Letters from this period survive in baked clay archives, preserved by the very fires that destroyed the buildings around them. They speak of famine. The king of the Hittites writes desperate requests to the Egyptian pharaoh for grain. Meneptah, son of Ramses II, dispatches shipments to feed the Hittite court. Ugarit's archive contains a now famous letter sent to Cyprus in which the Ugaritic king Amurapi begs for help. The letter ends mid-word. Amurapi never sent the rest. Ugarit was burning. When archaeologists excavated his palace in the 1920s, they found arrowheads in the doorways and skeletons in the streets. The destruction layer is dated to roughly 1190 BC. Across the same decades, Mycenaean centers on the Greek mainland, Pylos, Tiryns, Mycenae itself, burned in similar fashion. The Linear B writing system, used by Mycenaean palace administrators, disappeared with them. Greece entered a dark age. The next time anyone in the Aegean would write anything down, 4 centuries later, they would do it in a brand new alphabet borrowed from the Phoenicians. So who were the Sea Peoples? The Egyptian inscriptions name them, in groups, the Peliset, the Chika, the Shekelesh, the Danien, the Weshesh, the Shurdan, the Luka, the Ekwesh. None of these names match a known polity in the surviving records of any neighboring kingdom. They appear briefly in Hittite letters as raiders along the southern Anatolian coast. They appear in Ugaritic warnings as seaborne attackers. Then they appear in Egyptian temple reliefs as a coalition large enough to bring down empires. The leading hypothesis, advanced by historians like Eric Klein and Robert Drews, is that they were not a single people at all. They were what happens when a connected civilization breaks. Migrants, displaced peasants, mercenaries, second sons of palace dynasties without estates to inherit, sailors whose trade routes had collapsed, coalescing along the coastlines, raiding for food, then settling where they could. Some of the names suggest origins. The Peliset are almost certainly the people who would settle on the Levantine coast and become known to history as the Philistines. The Shurdan may be the ancestors of Sardinians, the Shekelesh of Sicilians, but they were not the only force at work. The Bronze Age collapse was a system failure with at least four interlocking causes that scholars now agree on. First, climate. Pollen cores from the Sea of Galilee and tree ring sequences from Anatolia show a sudden, severe drought beginning around 1250 BC and lasting more than a century. Second, earthquakes. A swarm of seismic events rolled through the Aegean in the late 13th century, evidenced by collapsed walls at multiple Mycenaean sites. Third, internal revolt. The Mycenaean palaces show signs of attack from within, not just without. And fourth, the raiders themselves. Klein's book on the period, titled simply 1137 BC, argues that no single one of these would have brought down the system. The system had become too efficient, too tightly coupled, too dependent on continuous trade. When several blows landed in close succession, every part of the network failed at once. The sea peoples in this reading were both effect and cause, symptoms of a world unraveling, who then accelerated its unraveling. Egypt held. The Egyptian state was older, larger, more centralized, and crucially had the agricultural buffer of the Nile, which did not depend on rainfall. Ramses III defeated the Sea Peoples in two great battles, one on land in the Levant and one at the mouth of the Nile. He settled the survivors as garrison troops along the Egyptian frontier. Several decades later, his own kingdom would weaken, but it would not collapse. When you walk through the Temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu today, you can still see the carved battle scenes. The Sea Peoples are there, in their feathered helmets and their reed boats, falling under Egyptian arrows. They look defeated, but Ramses had carved the wrong story. He thought he had repelled an invasion. What he had really done was outlast a collapse. The world he was born into, the world of Mycenae and Hattusa and Ugarit, of palace administrators writing on clay, of organized long-distance bronze production, that world was already gone. It would not return. What the Bronze Age collapse left behind, eventually, was something different, and in some ways better. With the palace bureaucracies gone, smaller polities had to organize themselves without central control. Iron, harder to work but more abundant than copper and tin, replaced bronze as the metal of choice, partly because the long-distance trade in tin had vanished. Alphabetic writing, simpler and more flexible than cuneiform or Linear B, emerged among the Phoenicians and spread across the Mediterranean. The age of the great palaces ended. The age of the city-state began. The Sea Peoples themselves dispersed. Some became the Philistines of the Hebrew Bible. Some founded settlements on Sardinia and Sicily that left distinctive bronze-ware archaeologists still recover today. Some simply settled along the Levantine coast and merged into the populations there. Their identity dissolved into the world they had helped reshape. We still do not know exactly who they were. The Hittite archives end at the moment they would have told us. The Mycenaean records were destroyed in the same fires that ended the world that produced them. What we have is the Egyptian victor's account and the silences of all the others. That, perhaps, is the most accurate description of what a civilizational collapse looks like from the inside. Not a single enemy. A fog of crises moving through a system that had become too fragile to absorb them. The Sea Peoples did not burn the Bronze Age. They were what was left after the Bronze Age burned itself.